My father excluded me from the brothers' wedding, then froze when he learned I paid for the venue. The last time my father looked me in the eye, he told me I was a disappointment wrapped in expensive law school debt. That was 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago. Not that I'm counting. I'm Avery Monroe, and if you ask my family to describe me, they'd probably say I'm the one who couldn't quite fit the mold. The diplomatic way of saying I was the black sheep in a family that prided itself on being the perfect shade of respectable. My father, Leonard Monroe, built his reputation as one of Atlanta's most prominent corporate attorneys on 3 pillars: unwavering tradition, calculated appearances, and the belief that success meant following a very specific blueprint. My brother Isaiah? He was the golden child who colored inside every single line of that blueprint. Fraternity president at Morehouse, corporate law degree from Emory, a corner office at Daddy's firm by 28, and now engaged to Simone Crawford, a debutante from Charlotte whose family tree reads like a who's who of Southern society. Then there was me. I should have been the perfect daughter. I had the grades, the LSAT scores, the acceptance letters. I even made it through 2 years of law school before I realized I was slowly suffocating in a life that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. While Isaiah was networking at country club galas, I was sketching logo designs on napkins during constitutional law. While he was impressing partners with his closing arguments, I was teaching myself Photoshop at 2 a.m. The breaking point came during my second year when I presented a business plan to my father, a creative branding agency that would help small businesses tell their stories through visual identity. I had market research, potential client lists, even a modest startup budget mapped out. He didn't even look at the folder. "Avery," he said, not glancing up from his case files, "graphic design is a hobby, not a career. You have a responsibility to this family's legacy. But what if I could build something meaningful? Something that helps?" Help who? Failed businesses that can't afford real marketing firms. He finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that crushed me more than anger ever could. Pity. You're throwing away a guaranteed future for finger paints and fairy tales. That night, I made 2 decisions that would reshape everything. First, I was dropping out of law school. Second, I was done trying to earn love from people who saw my dreams as defects. The family dinner where I announced my decision was a masterclass in controlled disappointment. Isaiah sat there in his press shirt and law firm tie, occasionally glancing at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Simone, who was still just his girlfriend then, kept her polite smile frozen in place while her eyes darted between me and the exit. "You're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life," my father said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Maybe," I replied, "but at least it'll be my mistake to make." That's when he delivered the line that still echoes in quiet moments. "Don't come crying to us when this little art project fails and you're broke at 30. I never came crying to them about anything again. The silence that followed my departure wasn't immediate. There were a few awkward holiday appearances, stilted phone calls about nothing important, and invitations to family events that felt more like obligations than genuine desire for my company. But gradually, the space between us widened until it became a chasm none of us seemed interested in crossing. I threw myself into building my agency, Monroe Creative, from my cramped studio apartment in East Atlanta. Those first months were brutal. Ramen noodles for dinner, my bed doubling as my office, client meetings at coffee shops because I couldn't afford proper office space. But something magical happened in that tiny apartment. I discovered I was good at this. Really good. My first major client was a struggling bakery in Little 5 Points. The owner, Mrs. Chun, had been trying to compete with a chain that had moved in next door. I spent weeks understanding her story, how she'd immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but her grandmother's recipes and a dream of community. The brand identity I created for her wasn't just a logo. It was her heart translated into colors and fonts and imagery that made people stop walking and start feeling. 6 months later, Mrs. Chun had a line out the door every morning. Word spread. More clients came. Small businesses, nonprofits, even a few mid-sized companies who wanted something more authentic than the cookie-cutter designs from big agencies. I moved into actual office space, hired my first employee, then my second. Meanwhile, my family's silence grew more deafening. I learned about Isaiah's engagement from a Facebook post. No phone call, no family meeting, no, hey, Avery thought you should know. Just a professionally shot photo of him and Simone at some vineyard in Napa, her hand positioned perfectly to showcase a diamond that probably cost more than my first year of business expenses. The comment section was a parade of congratulations from aunts, uncles, and family friends. People who used to ask about me at gatherings now seemed to have forgotten I existed. I stared at that photo for longer than I should have, noting how happy Isaiah looked, how perfectly Simone fit into the frame of their picture-perfect life. I almost called him that night. Almost. Instead, I closed my laptop and went back to work on a campaign for a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated women start their own businesses. Because that's what I did now. I helped underdogs tell their stories. Maybe because I understood what it felt like to be underestimated. The months rolled by, and my business continued to grow. I landed a contract with a major nonprofit, then another with a tech startup that ended up getting acquired. Money started flowing in ways I'd never imagined. But more importantly, I was building something that mattered, helping voices that had been ignored find their way to be heard. Then came the Instagram story that changed everything. I was scrolling through my feed on a Tuesday evening when I saw Simone's post, a perfectly curated flat lay of wedding invitations, save the dates, and what looked like venue brochures. The caption read, 6 months to go. Can't wait to marry my best friend at the most gorgeous venue in Charleston. White Heart Sparkles # Magnolia House Magic # 6 months and counting. Magnolia House. I knew that name. I knew it because 18 months earlier, I'd quietly invested in the Monroe and Wren Holdings Group that owned several luxury event venues across the Southeast. It was one of those business decisions that had more to do with diversifying my growing wealth than any emotional attachment to the event industry. But I definitely knew that name. A slow smile spread across my face as I reached for my laptop. If my memory was correct, Monroe and Wren Holdings owned the Magnolia House in Charleston. And if that was true, then my brother was planning to get married at a venue that I owned. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony that even I couldn't have scripted. I opened my investment portfolio and started scrolling through the documents, my heart beating faster with each page. There it was, clear as day. Monroe and Wren Holdings, LLC. Primary holdings include Magnolia House, Charleston, South Carolina, the Riverside Estate, Savannah, Georgia, and Clearwater Manor, Nashville, Tennessee. According to the paperwork I'd been too busy to really examine when I'd made the investment, I owned a 38% stake in the company. Not a majority, but enough to have a very loud voice in how things operated. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Really laughed for the first time in months. They said I was too different. That I didn't fit in their picture-perfect plans. Well, maybe it was time to see just how different I could be. The morning after discovering my family's venue choice, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had two options. I could let this twist of fate destroy me, or I could use it to rewrite the entire story. I chose to rewrite. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was working with. I called Marcus Webb, my financial advisor, and the man who'd helped me navigate my first serious investments. If anyone could give me the full picture of my stake in Monroe and Wren Holdings, it was him. Avery, good morning, Marcus answered on the second ring. What's got you calling before 9 a.m.? Last time you were this eager, you were about to triple your business revenue. I need everything you have on Monroe and Wren Holdings. Every document, every financial report, every operational detail. And I need it today. There was a pause. That's unusually specific. Any particular reason? Let's just say I'm about to take a much more active interest in the hospitality business. By noon, my dining table was covered with contracts, financial statements, and operational reports. What I discovered made my initial 38% stake look even more interesting than I'd realized. Monroe and Wren wasn't just profitable, it was thriving. The Magnolia House alone generated over $2 million in revenue annually, and Charleston's booming wedding market meant they were booked solid through the next 18 months. More importantly, the company structure gave stakeholders significant input on major bookings and events. Technically, I could have a say in any wedding that came through those doors. But this wasn't about throwing my weight around or creating drama. This was about something much more strategic. Over the past 3 years, while my family had been pretending I didn't exist, I'd been quietly building an empire they couldn't have imagined. Monroe Creative had evolved from my one-woman operation into a full-service branding agency with 12 employees and clients across 3 states. But that was just the beginning. 18 months ago, I'd caught the attention of Hartwell and Associates, a private equity firm specializing in creative industries. They'd approached me with an offer that would have sounded like science fiction during my ramen noodle days. They wanted to buy a controlling interest in my company for 8 figures, with me staying on as CEO and receiving funding to expand into new markets. The day I signed that deal, I became the kind of wealthy my father had always assumed was reserved for people like him. People who played it safe, followed the rules, and never colored outside the lines. I used some of that money to diversify into real estate and hospitality investments. Not because I was passionate about hotels or event venues, but because I understood something about business that my father never taught me. The most powerful moves are the ones nobody sees coming. Monroe and Wren Holdings had been one of those moves. The investment firm managing my portfolio had recommended it as a solid long-term play in the luxury events market. I'd signed the papers and filed it away as just another line item in my growing wealth. Now, staring at those documents, I realized I hadn't just bought into a business. I'd accidentally positioned myself at the center of my family's most important celebration. I spent the afternoon making strategic calls. First, to the managing partners at Monroe and Wren, introducing myself as an investor who wanted to take a more hands-on role. Then, to my own team at Monroe Creative, delegating projects so I could focus on what was about to become a very interesting side project. By evening, I had a plan that was both elegant and devastating in its simplicity. I wasn't going to stop the wedding. I wasn't going to reveal myself dramatically or create a scene. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to make their perfect day absolutely flawless, and then let them discover who had made it possible. The next morning, I called the Magnolia House directly. "Good morning. This is Avery Monroe from Monroe and Wren Holdings," I said to the event coordinator who answered. "I understand we have the Monroe Crawford wedding scheduled for 6 months from now." "Oh yes, Ms. Monroe. That's going to be one of our most elaborate events this year. The father of the groom specifically requested our premium package." I almost laughed. Of course Leonard had gone for the premium package. Image was everything to him. "I'd like to personally oversee some aspects of this event," I continued. "As an investor, I want to ensure we're delivering an exceptional experience." "Absolutely. Would you like me to schedule a meeting with the family?" "No," I said quickly. "I prefer to work behind the scenes. Consider me a silent partner in making this the wedding of their dreams." What the coordinator didn't know, what nobody would know, was that I was about to orchestrate the most expensive revenge plot in Charleston's social history. Except it wouldn't feel like revenge to anyone but me. I hung up the phone and opened my laptop, pulling up the preliminary invoice for Isaiah's wedding. The numbers made me whistle low under my breath. Even with a premium package, Leonard was looking at a bill that would put a serious dent in anyone's finances. But here's the thing about owning 38% of a company. You have certain privileges when it comes to how bills get processed. I opened a new document and began typing a memo to the Monroe and Wren accounting department. By the time I finished, every expense related to the Monroe Crawford wedding would be absorbed by the company as a goodwill gesture to valued clients. My father always said money talks. He just never imagined it might be speaking my language. The beauty of operating from the shadows is that nobody questions good fortune when it arrives quietly. Over the next few weeks, I became the ghost in the machine of Isaiah's wedding planning. Every Monday, I'd receive detailed reports from the Magnolia House team about the Monroe Crawford event. Every Tuesday, I'd review the expenses and quietly absorb them into the company's operational budget. Every Wednesday, I'd suggest small improvements that would make their day more spectacular than they'd ever imagined. The venue coordinator, Sarah Beth, a sweet woman in her 30s who treated every wedding like it was her own daughter's, had no idea she was talking to the sister who'd been erased from the family narrative. To her, I was simply Avery Monroe from corporate, an investor with an unusual interest in ensuring client satisfaction. Ms. Monroe, I have to say, the company's generosity with this particular event is remarkable, Sarah Beth said during one of our weekly calls. I've never seen management approve so many complimentary upgrades. We believe in creating magical experiences, I replied, reviewing the latest invoice that would mysteriously disappear from Leonard's final bill. What matters most is that the Monroe family has a perfect day. What I didn't tell her was that I'd already spent more on my brother's wedding than most people spend on their entire wedding and honeymoon combined. It started small. The basic floral package Isaiah had chosen was lovely but unremarkable, standard white roses and baby's breath arrangements that would photograph well but wouldn't take anyone's breath away. I quietly upgraded them to a designer's dream, cascading orchids, white peonies, and trailing jasmine that would transform the venue into something from a fairy tale. The florist called, Sarah Beth reported excitedly during our next conversation. They said there was a mix-up with the order, and they're delivering the premium botanical collection instead of the standard package. No additional charge. How wonderful, I said, making a note to send the florist a bonus for playing along so seamlessly. Next came the catering. Leonard had booked the standard reception menu, chicken or fish, predictable sides, a basic bar package. Fine for a family gathering, but hardly memorable for what was supposed to be the social event of Charleston's spring season. I studied the venue's premium catering options like I was planning a state dinner. Raw oyster bars with champagne mignonette, Wagyu beef stations, a dessert display that would include not just the wedding cake, but a full confectionery experience with French macarons, chocolate fountains, and a gelato cart. Another wonderful surprise, Sarah Beth called to tell me. The catering company had a cancellation for a corporate event the same weekend, so they're upgrading the Monroe wedding to their executive package. They said they'd rather see the food put to good use. I was beginning to enjoy the elaborate fiction we were all maintaining. But the music was where I really let my emotions guide my decisions. Isaiah had booked a standard DJ service, the kind that played all the expected songs and kept people dancing until midnight. Adequate, but not transcendent. I arranged for the Savannah Symphony's string quartet to perform the ceremony music and a jazz ensemble from New Orleans to play during cocktail hour. For the reception, I kept his DJ, but added a gospel choir for one surprise number that I knew would leave every guest in tears. Ms. Monroe, Sarah Beth said during our call that week, I don't know what kind of connections you have, but the entertainment upgrades that keep appearing on this event are extraordinary. The father of the groom called yesterday almost crying with gratitude. The image of Leonard crying over the unexpected generosity made something twist in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but something more complex, a mixture of vindication and sadness that this was how we'd ended up communicating through anonymous gifts and corporate accounting tricks. But I wasn't done yet. The detail that would haunt me for weeks was the menu cards. Every reception table would have small, elegant cards describing the evening's culinary offerings. Sarah Beth had shown me the standard design, simple, classic, perfectly forgettable. I'd like to suggest a small addition, I told her during our final planning call, 2 weeks before the wedding. On the back of each menu card, include a brief message. Something personal. What kind of message? I took a deep breath, knowing that this single decision would either be the perfect punctuation mark to my invisible orchestration, or the beginning of consequences I couldn't predict. Print this in gold script, I said slowly. Tonight's event is brought to you with love, by someone you left behind. Sarah Beth was quiet for a moment. That's quite poetic. A bit mysterious, though. Are you sure that's what you want? I'm sure, I said. Sometimes the most important messages are the ones that make people think. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the Atlanta skyline, wondering if I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The message wasn't cruel, but it wasn't subtle either. Anyone who read it would wonder. Some might even guess. But that was the point, wasn't it? I didn't need revenge. I just wanted the truth to speak for itself. For 3 years, I'd been the daughter who disappeared, the sister who'd chosen dreams over duty, the family member whose absence had become so normal that no one questioned it anymore. Tomorrow night, I'd remind them that invisible doesn't mean gone. And love doesn't always look the way people expect it to. The morning of Isaiah's wedding, I woke up with a decision that surprised even me. I was going, not as the vengeful sister crashing the party, not as the dramatic revelation that would steal focus from the bride and groom. I was going as a witness to my own story, the woman I'd become in the 3 years since they'd written me off. I spent 2 hours getting ready, treating it like armor for battle. The dress I chose was wine-colored silk that moved like liquid when I walked, sophisticated but not attention-grabbing. My hair, which I'd been growing out since leaving law school, was swept into an elegant chignon that made my neck look longer, my shoulders straighter. The makeup was subtle but precise, the kind that made you look like the most polished version of yourself. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman my family wouldn't immediately recognize, which was exactly the point. The drive to Charleston took 4 hours, giving me plenty of time to question my sanity. What was I hoping to accomplish? What did I expect to feel watching my brother marry someone who'd never bothered to learn my middle name, in a venue I'd secretly paid for, surrounded by family members who'd perfected the art of forgetting I existed? But as the Charleston skyline came into view, I realized this wasn't about them anymore. This was about closure, not the kind where everyone hugs and forgives each other, but the kind where you finally stop carrying other people's expectations as your own burden. The Magnolia House was even more stunning than the photos had suggested. Built in 1847, the antebellum mansion sat surrounded by ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss, with gardens that looked like they'd been painted by someone who believed in magic. Cars were already filling the circular drive, luxury vehicles that spoke of old money and older traditions. I parked near the back and made my way toward the ceremony space, where white chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing an altar decorated with the upgraded florals I'd secretly arranged. The orchids and peonies created an ethereal backdrop that was already making guests pull out their phones to capture the beauty. Taking a seat in the very last row, I watched the familiar dance of a Southern wedding unfold. Extended family members air-kissed and complimented each other's outfits. Groomsmen in perfectly pressed tuxedos checked their pocket watches and straightened each other's bow ties. The bridesmaids, all polished and poised in blush pink gowns, fussed over Simone's train while she posed for pre-ceremony photos. And then there was my father. Leonard Monroe stood near the altar in his role as father of the groom, and I felt my breath catch. He'd aged in the 3 years since I'd seen him, more gray at his temples, deeper lines around his eyes. But he carried himself with the same commanding presence that had intimidated me as a child, the same certainty that his way was the only way that mattered. When Isaiah appeared, walking down the aisle with confident strides, I felt a complicated surge of emotions. My brother looked handsome and happy, genuinely radiant in a way that made my chest tight with memories of when we were kids and actually liked each other. Before I became the disappointment, and he became the golden child. Before our relationship became another casualty of Leonard's need for everything to fit his definition of success. The ceremony was beautiful, the kind of perfect that money and careful planning could create. Simone floated down the aisle like she was born for this moment, and when she and Isaiah exchanged vows, even I had to admit they seemed genuinely in love. The string quartet I'd arranged played with a kind of precision that made several guests dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. During the recessional, as the happy couple walked back down the aisle past my hidden seat, Isaiah's eyes swept across the crowd. For just a moment, his gaze landed on me. I saw confusion flicker across his face, something familiar, but not quite placeable. Then Simone squeezed his arm, redirecting his attention, and the moment passed. The cocktail hour showcased every upgrade I'd secretly arranged. Guests raved about the raw oyster bar, the jazz ensemble from New Orleans, the signature cocktails that weren't on the original menu. I watched Leonard work the crowd, accepting compliments about the venue and the elaborate touches with the gracious modesty of someone who believed he'd planned every detail himself. I nursed a glass of champagne and stayed invisible, just another well-dressed guest in a sea of Charleston society. When dinner was announced, I followed the crowd into the reception space, choosing a table toward the back where I could observe without being observed. The room looked like something from a magazine spread. The upgraded lighting I'd arranged cast everything in a warm, golden glow, and the enhanced floral arrangements created an atmosphere of luxury that had guests pulling out their phones constantly. The dinner was exquisite. The Wagyu beef station and premium wine selections I'd secretly approved drew audible appreciation from even the most jaded socialites in attendance. I watched Leonard beam as multiple guests complimented him on the spectacular choices, never knowing that his estranged daughter had orchestrated every detail. Then came the speeches. Isaiah's best man, a fraternity brother named Chad, who looked exactly like someone named Chad would look, stood to give his toast. As he launched into stories about college pranks and bachelor party adventures, I noticed Sarah Beth, the venue coordinator, making her way through the crowd with a small, gift-wrapped box. She moved with purpose toward the head table, where Leonard sat in his role as father of the groom. My heart started beating faster as I realized what was about to happen. This was it. The moment I'd orchestrated, but somehow hadn't fully prepared myself to witness. Sarah Beth reached Leonard just as Chad was hitting the emotional crescendo of his speech about love and commitment. She leaned down with her professional smile and whispered something in his ear, then handed him the box. From the venue's founder, I heard her say clearly, "With congratulations on this special day." Leonard looked puzzled but pleased as he accepted the gift. The room's attention was still on Chad's speech, but I watched with laser focus as my father carefully unwrapped the box. Inside was a single brass plaque, elegant and simple, engraved with words that would rewrite everything he thought he knew about this perfect day. Avery Monroe, founding partner, Magnolia House Group. Leonard's face went through a series of changes that would have been comical if they weren't so devastating. Confusion gave way to recognition. Recognition gave way to disbelief. And disbelief gave way to something that looked like he'd been struck by lightning. The champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor with a sound that cut through Chad's speech like a gunshot. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even breathe. I just watched the man who once told me I'd never amount to anything try to remember how to exist in a world where his forgotten daughter owned the ground he was standing on. The silence that followed was loud enough to rewrite 3 years of radio silence between us. Loud enough to say everything I'd never been allowed to say. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones that don't need to be spoken at all. 3 weeks after Isaiah's wedding, I found myself staring at an envelope that had arrived at my office with my name written in handwriting I recognized from childhood birthday cards and homework help sessions. My brother's penmanship hadn't changed much in the years since we'd been close enough to pass notes under the dinner table during Leonard's endless lectures about proper etiquette and future planning. The return address was his downtown Atlanta apartment, not the house he and Simone had bought in Buckhead, which told me this letter was something he'd written alone. I let it sit on my desk for 2 days before I found the courage to open it. Avery, I don't know how to start this, so I'm just going to write what I should have said a long time ago.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry I didn't fight for you to be at the wedding. I'm sorry I let Dad's disappointment become my silence. I'm sorry I took the easy path of going along with the family narrative that it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. What you did at the wedding, orchestrating everything, making it beautiful, revealing yourself in that moment, it was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. And it made me realize how much of a coward I've been. You were always the stronger one between us. Even when we were kids, you were the one who stood up to Dad when he was being unreasonable. You were the one who defended other kids at school when they were being picked on. You were the one who chose your own path, even when it meant losing everything familiar. I chose safety. I chose the path that kept peace, even when that peace came at the cost of my sister. I don't know if you'll ever want to see me again, but if you do, I'd like to buy you coffee sometime. I'd like to hear about your business, your life, the person you've become. I'd like the chance to be a real brother instead of just someone who shares your last name. If you don't want that, I understand. But I needed you to know that your absence has been felt every day for 3 years. The family dinners are quieter without your laugh. The holidays feel incomplete without your sharp commentary on Dad's latest theories about the right way to live.
Simone asks about you now.
She said she wishes she'd gotten to know you before believing what everyone else said about our complicated family dynamics. She said anyone who could orchestrate what you did has to have the kind of mind she'd love to pick. Maybe we'll meet for coffee one day. Maybe not. But either way, I want you to know that what you did didn't just shock Dad. It made me proud to be your brother. Love, Isaiah. P.S. Simone says the wedding was the most beautiful she's ever attended, and she knows now who to thank for that. I read the letter 3 times before I set it down, surprised by the tears that had gathered in my eyes. Not tears of sadness, exactly, but something more complex, grief for the relationship we'd lost, mixed with a cautious hope for what we might build if we both chose to try. But first, I had other work to do. The success of Isaiah's wedding had sparked something in me that went beyond personal vindication. Watching the Magnolia House staff execute flawless service, seeing how the right environment could transform an ordinary celebration into something magical, I realized I'd found more than just a profitable investment. I'd found a platform for something bigger. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with the other partners at Monroe and Wren Holdings. I want to establish a scholarship fund. I announced to the room of investors who'd been wondering about my sudden hands-on involvement in the company, specifically for young women from underrepresented communities who want to start their own businesses. The numbers I presented made several partners shift uncomfortably in their seats. I was proposing to allocate 30% of our annual profits toward funding entrepreneurs who looked like me, the sharp-tongued, underestimated, brilliant girls who'd been told their dreams were too big or too different or too risky. The Magnolia House Foundation, I explained, will provide not just capital, but mentorship, workspace, and access to networks that these women might never otherwise reach. We'll use our venues to host entrepreneur showcases, networking events, and educational workshops. That's quite generous, one of the older investors said carefully. But what's the business case? I smiled the same smile I'd worn when I'd orchestrated my brother's wedding from the shadows. The business case is that we're in the business of creating perfect moments. What's more perfect than giving someone the tools to build the life they've always dreamed of? The vote was unanimous. 6 months later, the first class of Magnolia House Foundation scholars was announced. 12 young women, ranging in age from 19 to 28, each with a business plan that had been rejected by traditional funding sources for being too niche or too risky or simply because the founders didn't fit the profile of what investors expected successful entrepreneurs to look like. Among them was a young woman named Kira who wanted to create a line of professional clothing for plus-size women in corporate environments. Another, named Maria, had developed an app to help first-generation college students navigate financial aid and career planning. A third, named Destiny, was launching a food truck that would bring healthy, affordable meals to food deserts in urban communities. They were all me in different forms, women who'd been told their visions were too ambitious, too specific, too much. The scholarship announcement made the local business journals, then the regional papers, then national publications that were hungry for stories about innovative approaches to venture capital and social impact. The coverage always mentioned that the founder was a young Black entrepreneur who'd built her fortune in creative services before diversifying into hospitality. They rarely mentioned that I was Leonard Monroe's daughter, which was exactly how I preferred it. The family still doesn't speak much of me, according to what I hear through Atlanta's tight social circles. But I'm told that when guests tour the Magnolia House now, Sarah Beth tells them the story of the venue's founding partner, a brilliant woman who believes in making dreams come true from behind the scenes. Last month, I finally called Isaiah. We met for coffee at a small shop in Virginia Highland, neutral territory where neither of us had history. It was awkward at first. 3 years of silence doesn't dissolve over lattes, but by the end of the afternoon, we were laughing about childhood memories and debating whether Dad's latest courtroom victory was impressive or just predictable. We're taking it slow, rebuilding a relationship that's different from what we had as children but perhaps more honest than what we'd had as adults. Simone joins us sometimes, and she's surprisingly good company, sharp and funny in ways that suggest she was performing as much as the rest of us during those family gatherings. Leonard and I haven't spoken since that night in the courtyard. I hear through Isaiah that he's proud of what I've accomplished, but can't figure out how to bridge the gap between the daughter he dismissed and the woman I've become. Maybe someday he'll find the courage to try. Maybe someday I'll be ready to listen. For now, it's enough to know that I don't need his approval anymore. They taught me what love isn't: conditional, controlling, limited by narrow definitions of success and respectability. I'm spending the rest of my life learning what it truly is: expansive, generous, powerful enough to transform rejection into purpose. I never got a seat at their table. Instead, I built my own, and now 12 brilliant women sit with me, planning their own takeovers of industries that never saw them coming. That's all I ever needed. That's everything I never knew I wanted. That's the legacy I choose now.